We can start with today's session. Today, we will have several speakers with us. It's a select panel. We'll be looking at how the topics of land use are linked to peace building. So we'll be listening to Irene Vélez y James Larrea. We'll also listen to a team from Stephen Haffen, Gabriel Tommy, and Torsten Krasen. And then soon we'll have a fourth participant from Mesetas Lauribe, so that we can see not only from the general perspective, but also the people who live their daily lives, the issue of peace. Oh, there she is. I can see that she's joined us. Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. Let's hope you enjoyed lunch. So let's take advantage of these 1.5 hours. We will be working and listening to all these interesting talks, and let's hope you can get some coffee and take full advantage of this information they'll be sharing with us. I just want to give you a brief context how we're going to do this. You've already heard the recommendation about interpretation. There's the interpretation icon there in the bottom. It's available in English and Spanish. Choose the language of your preference. And then we'll have some presentations first, each one 12 minutes. Each of the four groups will take that time to present information. We hope then that through the chat box, you can send the questions to us. And once we listen to all the presentations, the intervention from each panelist, we'll have some about 30-35 minutes for some discussion based on the questions. So please, either in the chat box or in the QA window, if possible, please tell us who you would like to answer the question. So no further be said, I'm going to let James and Irene start telling us about governance for peace, for whom, by whom, for whom. Irene and James, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Then I'm going to share my screen, and it's going to be me. I'm going to be moving on the slides, even though James will start telling us about what we're talking about. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much, Camilo, and all the team for facilitating this space to share with you these insights together with Irene Vélez. We've been gathering, collecting for about 3 years. It's been work in the north of Cauca department, 3 towns, 3 municipalities. They're part of the PDT region in Corinto, Miranda, and Buenos Aires. And together with the indigenous communities, peasant and African Colombian communities, and their reincorporation processes in the region, what they've witnessed. So we've been building these reflections that we'll be sharing with you. We've called this talk Governance for Peace, by whom and for whom. So the first thing we shall state or highlight is that precisely the peace accords had one of the concepts that have been very highly assessed in the peace building models at the international level, which is this one about territorial peace. By territorial peace, we saw the need to bring the agreements, the different instruments that were agreed at the dialogue table, bring them down at the territorial level, and also adjusting them to the features, the nuances, the ethnical particularities and gender that we find there in the territories. These approaches may precisely be or are those that we're going to hear of as a cross-cutting approach for all the 6 points of the agreement. Within this territorial peace agreement, the main instrument of the agreement is the development programs with territorial emphasis, PDET, which were expected to transform the ways of life of rural communities in the 170 municipalities of the country that were most struck by the war, by the state abandonment, the presence of illegal crops, amongst other issues. But from the very first moment, and here's where we begin with the analysis or the elements for discussion and conversation, is that at the moment of the formulation of these PDTs, again, development plans with territorial emphasis, we see the first differences as be the communities and the state institutions. And that shows us what we see here in the slide. Is that there are different conceptions, different notions of peace, of what each social stakeholder will conceive by peace and what their experiences are and the expectations are. There might be more, but we felt we wanted to concentrate on these four views of or notions of peace. The first one, we've called it neoliberal peace, is the one that sees peace as an opportunity, especially to expand the neoliberal economy and to consolidate the capitalism accumulation. So it's peace as an opportunity to drive, to foster what the Santos government called the locomotions, the engines of development. One second notion is this one: by imposing pacification, self-imposing pacification, which is peace at the end of war, but through the military victory of the enemy, the other one. So the imposition of these of the state of law on the enemy as a mechanism to advance towards peace. Now, in the popular field, the social movements and citizens, we find others. First of all, peace seen as a possibility to transform, as a transforming power. Insufficient peace, which is the sectors that tell us for as long as there is this structure of the state, neoliberal state, and the capitalism uh, mechanism of production, we will not enjoy peace. The third one that we suggested or that we heard is an indifference regarding the peace process, saying that the responsibility of the solution to the conflict is belongs to the stakeholders or relates to the stakeholders that have been involved in the conflict. And the last one is a spiritual peace notion. That's what we called it, the one in green, further bottom right. It means the process of reconciliation and forgiveness that allows us to move on, to move forward, and to overcome our differences. These first notions of peace are added to the second category of analysis that we shared, which is territory. Precisely about the territory, we'll come across two big conceptions or notions. On the one hand, we have the predominant notion of the state, the institutions, the state agencies that see as the space that contains or the space limitation for the administration of public power. Whereas for the communities and for different social sectors, the territory is seen, is conceived as social construction, a result of the relation between the community and the space, the place where they inhabit. That means that it's not just a container, but there are some relations, there are things going on in there, and it shapes the identity of the communities and other elements that are additional. Precisely when those notions of territory, that's where we see that when they formulate the PDTs, the predominant view is imposed, the view of the state, and there is a limited option to include in this PDETs, again, the development programs or development plans with territorial emphasis, because the implementation of the methodology kind of fractures the territory into axes or pillars or uh, silos, whereas communities in their life plans, the development plans, their territorial proposals, they take on the territory as a whole, as an interrelated system that cannot be divided. Additionally, In addition to methodology, there are some substantial modifications to the peace accords, the final peace accord, during the implementation, which we knew as the fast track, and it leads to the dissolution of the comprehensive nature of the agreement. It means that each of the 6 points was linked to the others, and to the extent that they were comprehensively deployed, we would make progress to what was expected, that was peace, long lasting peace. But all those changes and modifications, amendments, arbitrary in nature to the negotiation process, caused that peace to become a technocratic, bureaucratic issue, because it landed on what was called the new institutionality for peace. That was these institutions that were created to lead, guide, and direct the developments of the peace accords, or the implementation of the peace accords. Of course, we'll see this later. They are institutions that reproduce the very same logic and power relations that are traditional to the state, many of which have also fed the confrontation, not only the armed conflict, but also social conflict that our country lives. And we can say that we are interested here to interpret and deduce to the extent the way the state institutions come closer to a territory, they approach the territory, and they conceive this territory in silos, in divisions. Some divisions are created, they do not exist in the cultural and social relations of the territory, and that relates to the land use, because precisely those communities they are cross-cutting borders, and their social, cultural, spiritual relations go beyond those administrative frontiers. When the state comes with a participation model, it means they use the administrative division as the criteria for participation, and individualizes this from a very modern liberal perspective. But rather, what they're doing is they're introducing a fraction. They are fractioning that social cultural weaving that has existed there, has existed before the interaction with the state in that territory. The result is that not only in itself, this fraction may create impact on the relations that all by themselves are tense, very indigenous peoples, farmers, peasants, and African Colombians, regarding land possession, land tenure, land titling. You know that in this region, especially the north of Cauca, there's been a history of tension, pressure, poor management, of course, from the state. And in addition to this, what you understand is that there is an exclusion of the or from the most risky projects, more revolutionary projects of the local communities. So, for example, the city councils, town councils, African Colombian organizations, indigenous peasant communities are not invited as states as stakeholders to participate, but they are guests. They are invited as individuals. So it's not the organizations, the communities that have been there present historically. They've been there. It's not the groups that have come to be part of the table, the construction table of these PDETs, but it's just some lists, some market lists, some individuals that come, and they keep them recorded in the 8 pillars that were defined from Bogota, from the capital city. And that's where we see a new element that we believe is important. And it's kind of a cascade of consequences. And in addition to creating this territory fractioning, and as a result, there is this exclusion of political, collective political bodies that may bring more transformation, and they are less aligned with the homologic discourse of the neoliberal state. So there's a new relation that is centralized, it's centralized power by the government. So that was interesting to us, because it turns out that even though they talked about a bottom up of participation, and we were all excited uh, looking at the concepts of leading and echoing the local turn in participation and peace building, it turns out that it's just bottom up for participation, but not for decision making, because the power as such continues to be centered in Bogota. So, for example, the 8 pillars are defined in Bogota. already gives us an idea as to what and how the state wants communities to become organized and how they should place their expectations towards or from peace building. But that was not the only thing. We attended some participation spaces regarding these PDTs where the communities demanded to incorporate the issue of formalization of the property of the lands, the property titles, the expansion of the indigenous reservations, buy lands to create and formalize the peasant reservation areas, which at the moment are just of uh, they only exist in this region. And the public bodies insisted that neither the purchase nor the formalization could be within the PDTs, but what they could look forward to is some management. And so what ended happening is that all this participation turns into some mirror of power, and it legitimizes on the one hand what the government brings, the central government brings from Bogota to be imposed on the local organization, and it is expected that they welcome it, but at the same time turns out these local organizations end up uh, ignored with this sensation of being participating that they never had the opportunity before, but they're not really taken into account. And this may cause some sort of weakening of the other forms of organization in these social processes. That, for example, there was an indigenous strike, and they kind of went back to their social organization and political organization. So there was a trend that during the PDT building, all the communities were there, present, very expectant. However, when they see, and here's where we see the effect of the switching government, that they see that, as a matter of fact, there's no implementation, there's no such implementation, and the demands as regarding lands to communities, they're just, they become an euphemism in public documents that record all this process and all these requests and all these plans that in theory would have come to the state, and then the indigenous organization mobilizes again. We saw two movements, one in 2019, and since Duque came to Cauca, but he didn't come to talk to the community, so the indigenous movement decides to go to Bogota, and we see that in the dialogue of this process. It's a very milestone moment because that's when the community wants to participate in their own terms, but then the state is not interested in that participation anymore. And that clearly talks about the fact that the state is interested in one type of participation, for example, that can create a list, just a list of names. It might look nice in the picture, but not a mobilization, not a movement such as the indigenous movement, which brings their own agenda and it tries to reverse and transform the power relations with the state. I'm sorry, you have 1 minute left. Please go to the conclusions. Okay, we're coming to the conclusions. So there are three conclusions. The first thing is we agree that there's lack of compliance and modification of the peace accords. This has caused the reconfiguration of the armed conflict and an intensification of the social, cultural conflicts, especially the territories where we are investigating and researching. And that has to do not only with the fact that there are groups, subgroups from the guerrillas, from the FARC, but there's also been a neoliberal imposition of the state dynamics, and this causes some effects, destructive effects about the dynamics or on the social and community dynamics. On the other hand, we see that this model by Santos, and especially the design and the architecture of the peace accords, there are some big flaws, especially because of the structure of participation, which did not really consider the transformation of their power relations, especially with the state, relations with the state that continue to perpetrate the subordination of individuals and the communities. They continue to be blacks, indigenous, and African Colombian communities. Then when the Duque administration came in, it even got worse because when we see is now self-imposing, uh, let's say, initiative, and that's precisely what has come to replace this concept of territorial peace that had been coined by Jaramillo and Santos. Thank you. Thank you, Irene and James, for your presentation. As I said in the chat, we will be facilitating or will be sharing the presentations to with those of you who may be interested. I think now we want to understand what we understand by peace. It seems like many times we have, it seems like we would have the same concept or notion, but there are different positions depending on where we're standing. And that's how we'll face the situations. Let's see now with another panelist what other elements we may be approaching to see this relation that exists between natural capital and peace, and how these concepts presented before may help here to shed light. So I invite Stephen. Please share your presentation with us, and he'll be telling us about the information related to the natural capital and space, financial, geographical, and the conciliation of peace processes in Colombia. At this point, Stephen will be presenting in English, so I encourage those of you who do not understand English to go to the interpretation icon and switch to Spanish. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. My apologies. Let me share my screen again. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Gabrielle, Liliana, and I, we were an interdisciplinary team. I'm an historian by training of modern Latin America. Liliana is an anthropologist of, she works on landmines in the Amazonian, in Colombia's Amazonian region. And Gabrielle is a finance practitioner who's been working in the sustainable finance space for 15 years. So we're collaborating on trying to see how tools of sustainable finance could be used as a tool in aiding peace consolidation and maintaining the integrity and sustainability of the environment. Now, I should say that in spatial finance, we understand that there are some limitations. The example that I'm going to focus on today is of a legal business enterprise. And we understand that spatial finance may not be useful for industries that are illegal and informal. And one of the things that we're going to, in future research, is try to suss out how spatial finance can be helpful for those industries that are at once in the same time legal and illegal, like gold mining, right? So natural capital, for those of you may not be familiar with the concept, it refers to the living and non-living components of ecosystems, not including people or what we manufacture. But it's these living and non-living components that contribute to the generation of goods and services of value for people. So we can think of nature as a stock. And when we use the term capital, we're not using it in terms of money. We're thinking of it more of as a resource or an asset. But nature is a stock that provides a flow of benefits to people and the economy. And it consists of natural capital assets such as water, forests, clean air that provide humans with the means for healthy lives and enable economic activity. Nature is the ultimate source of water, food and feed, energy, medicines, and genetic resources, and a variety of materials fundamental for human existence. As you can see from the graph, there's two things I'd like to point out very quickly. One is ecosystem functions and ecosystem services. Functions, if you will, is nature's capacity, right? If you will, the supply. Whereas the services, those are the use and the performance of the functions that we have access to. Sustainable finance is a framework. It's an approach to allocating investment money, dollars, euros, pounds, what have you, that produce sustainable outcomes. Positive externalities is the phrase that they use in the business. Key to it is, to sustainable development, sustainable finance, is alignment with the 2030 agenda, alignment with the SDGs, and the three of us would argue it should also include alignment with the 2015 Paris Agreement. A key component of sustainable finance is the push for systems thinking in investment decisions, and the necessity to consider externalities, positive or negative, as a consequence of these investment decisions. An emerging tool set of sustainable finance is something that they call spatial finance. And it's a toolkit that relies on GIS mapping. It relies on the Internet of Things, if you will, remote sensors. It also relies on old school ESG, environmental, social, and governance research related to sustainable development, sustainability. Honestly, it's the innovation of something quite simple. It is effectively putting a name of a company or the name of an investor on a map. So it's one thing to say that, you know, this firm invests in that polluter. An innovation is like putting them on the map, like actually placing where those dollars may go to produce some environmental degradation. And it can be qualitative or quantitative, right? You can identify the company, or you can also identify the amount that they're investing. So how can spatial finance assist in peace consolidation as well as environmental sustainability? Our hypothesis is as follows. The integration of spatial finance in the development of Colombia's natural capital, or the maintenance of it, will be a critical ingredient in the consolidation of peace. Spatial finance integrates geospatial data into financial practice, allowing sustainability risks to be better identified and managed. Allowing sustainability risks to be better, identified and managed. Given the need for foreign investors, spatial finance will be attractive, permitting asset owners to engage firm directors in a prompter manner. Corporations hopefully will like it better and be better able to understand natural capital risks and impacts in their supply chains. And policymakers will be able to track progress on an inclusive peace in Colombia's progress against the Paris Agreement and the UN SDGs. So we do think it has a role. We understand there's limitations, but we also think there's opportunities. We think there are 4 touch points where spatial finance can be of assistance. First, it can help raise accountability or identify accountability. We can find out who finances what and where they finance it. Second, it will allow for the assessment of environmental challenges in conflict and peace hotspots and how it relates to economic activities. Third, it can encourage international engagement to contribute to responsible investment. And finally, a touch point we think spatial finance can assist is that it would help identify stakeholders that may be adjacent to the formal peace process, but could play a role in environmental sustainability or not, in peace consolidation or not. Some of y'all are probably very familiar with this. Coal mining is a legal business activity. Even with some of these firms that I'm going to mention today are considering pulling out, the Colombian government is still looking to export coal to Asia. They see opportunity in China. Nevertheless, it's the 5th largest producer or exporter in the world, 9th largest producer in 2018, and 84% of reserves are up in the 2 departments, the northern departments of La Guajira and Cesar. This map here identifies the current mining licenses in force. They're noted by the pink lining. In addition, so this right here is Cerrejón, the very infamous and famous Cerrejón in La Guajira. These are largely Wayuu communities right here. Down here is Cesar, and here you have a lot of different mining interests. You have Drummond, which is a private international mining firm out of Alabama. You also have Glencore, the Swiss firm. They're moving out though, but you also have Turkish as well as Colombian operators in there as well. What's important for our purposes is please note the rail line here, the rail line here, which takes you to Puerto Bolivar, and I believe this one is Puerto Nuevo. The rail lines and the ports are privately held by the mining operators as well. And in the coal corridor, you have 2 ETCRs, spaces, formal spaces for the reincorporation of ex-combatants of FARC as a part of the peace process. Just some statistics. Most of y'all, I'm sure, are very aware that La Guajira and Cesar have certain socioeconomic challenges, in particular, high rates of poverty, very youthful population. In the case of La Guajira, you have a large presence of the indigenous population, almost half, and the like. Just some images very quickly of the ETCRs. There are only 2, right? So there's not as large a presence, formal presence, as there are in other places of Colombia, but given the prominence of the process and the allocation of resources, the ETCRs could showcase the general situation that will complement the activism of the Wayuu, as well as the international NGOs who are active against the coal operators. It would show that these communities are not well connected and struggle creating productive activities despite having political support. And now that the ETCRs are there and in the coal corridor, there's a greater opportunity to look at how these mining interests operate. If you will, peace is an excuse to better know the territory. For our purposes, I'll actually take you to the next slide. We're going to focus on Cerrejón very quickly. Cerrejón is a consortium of 3 multinational mining operations, the Swiss Glencore, the South African Anglo-American, and the Australian BHP. Together, they own Cerrejón, and their major assets include the coal mine itself, which is 30,000 hectares, it's square hectares, it's massive. 3 tailing dams where all the toxic runoff are held, the heavy equipment that yanks it, pulls it out, puts it on the train, the railroad itself that takes it up to Puerto Bolivar, and then they also own the facilities at Puerto Bolivar. Puerto Bolivar can handle coal ships that move 180,000 tons. So it's a substantial facility. So let's look at some of these operators and see how spatial finance may be of help. Glencore has invested more than $5 billion in their coal mining operations in both Cesar and La Guajira. 3 via Prodeco, which they bought 25 years ago, and more than $2 billion as the consortium of Cerrejón. A key question for these publicly traded companies is how they finance their operations. They use it through a variety of, we call it capital structure, but it could be the issuance of bonds, it could be stock, it could be private placements. If you look at their top 10 investors, you have BlackRock is number 1. BlackRock holds about 6.5% of Glencore's corporate debt, hundreds of millions of dollars. This is the Qatar National, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar. They're the largest equity owner of Glencore. And then you have some of the usual suspects. You have JP Morgan Chase, you have Lord Abbett, which is an American investment firm, UBS, Western Asset, Allianz, which is a German firm, Goldman Sachs. This one down here, AB, Alliance Bernstein, that's actually 60% held by the French insurance company AXA. Each one of these investors has more than $100 million invested in Glencore, which means they have money invested in Colombia. A second one. Okay, I'm almost there. Thank you. BHP, similar story. More than $2 billion invested in Cerrejón. You see some of the usual suspects. BlackRock is also the largest holder of BHP debt, about 5.5%. Again, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But you also have Vanguard. Remember, BlackRock has publicly stated its embrace. They have draped themselves in the flag of sustainability, and yet they're the number one debt holder of BHP and Glencore. Okay, thank you. To the conclusions. One of the things to bear in mind is a goal of sustainable finance is to transform coal deposits such as Cerrejón and what you find in Cesar into what is known as stranded assets. Stranded assets are assets that have zero economic value. Okay, so this is one of the motivating principles. It's not to say that it'll happen next year, 5 years, 10 years from now, but that is a long-term goal. Spatial finance, we believe, can be a tool used in the aid of this process, in particular the peace process. Spatial finance must be used to raise the cost of capital for firms operating in extractive industries that pollute. Spatial finance must be used to help identify operators, financiers, places, and mechanisms that produce these negative social and environmental externalities. Investors with positions in funds operated by BlackRock or insurance policies with Prudential, they have to ask hard questions. Does BlackRock or Prudential or any investment bank know it has investments in Colombia? Do they realize the negative social and environmental externalities their investments help fund? Do they have policies in place that support indigenous human rights, political rights? Do they have policy in place that supports the peace process? If so, where is it? If not, when will they articulate it? Finally, spatial finance has the added benefit of assisting other actors already committed to peace consolidation and environmental sustainability. It opens another front, if you will, by engaging economic actors that produce negative social and environmental impacts. It demands the consideration of local communities by using data produced locally to engage in these environmental consequences. It creates accountability. It allows, we think, for empowering local communities with greater transparency. It will do the same for investors. And finally, it will expand the number of international stakeholders working for peace and consolidation, environmental resilience, to include institutional investors and potential sovereign wealth funds. Camilo, thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting to see how these new approximations may aid so that financing goes exactly to generating the benefits that we seek to have and not the impact. Okay, so precisely now we're going to be able to connect with some experience from the multi-active cooperation of tourism for peace, serenity, and food security. Is a presentation by Jennifer Martinez. Regarding that piece is also done with nature. It'll be very interesting to see how all these big investments may be impacting territories directly, and then hear in the voice of Jennifer how they are doing this in the territory, how they perceive this peace process. And so Jennifer requested that we could share with you a video. So I'm going to ask Aristotle to help us with the video so that then we can listen to Jennifer. Can you please play the video? Reconciliation amongst indigenous. Oh, it has subtitles in English. I'm sorry. We want you to discover our path to peace through tourism because this is the best route we've taken. We hope this process will continue for the sake of peace because it's important for us and it's a benefit to the whole world. Thank you very much for sharing the video. So Jennifer, welcome. Good afternoon. So I understand that you'll be sharing the slides. Let us know when we should move on to the next slide. Once again, thank you for joining us and sharing with us from the territory how you feel peace there. Good afternoon. As it was said, I'm Jennifer Martinez. I live in this town called Mesetas Meta. I'm gonna tell you and share with you a little bit how it's been, how the work has been in our territory. First of all, thank you. I want to thank the peace accords. To be able to start, it was at the end of 2017. Thanks to the Norwegian Embassy and UNDP, we got this program to our territory. It was a program called Environments for Peace of Life with Dignity and Reconciliation. As a result of this program, we have the cooperative. It's a cooperative for food surrounding and tourism. It's formed 7% of peasant communities, and we have 30% of processes to be reincorporated after the conflict. We have welcomed both women and young people, and it's been a challenge since to buy the land to get the land. Well, it hasn't been any easy because we don't have land titles or land deeds. So it was a pretty complex process to be able to get the land and have this cooperation, this association today in our territory. It hasn't been easy, but we still have done this together since we realized that the peasant communities and those that came from the out of the conflict, they live the same difficulties that any peasant, any farmer has faced, for example, in health and education, culture. Um, Also, this land, we're able to purchase this land thanks to the support from each one of the beneficiaries. Out of those 100 beneficiaries, all of us, each one provided their grain of sand to be able to buy this land, but we don't have a public deed for it since we don't have access or guarantee to land or titles, property titles or land titles, but we can also show and prove that with efforts and desires we can achieve this. In this land, this ranch or farm, we have some models: forest exploitation, restoration, conservation. Our objective is to have a transformation point. Since if we transform our products, they'll have an added value, and we don't have to be selling them to a third party. So it's to show that at this farm, what we wish to do is to have an educational center for farmers, for peasants, so that young people do not have to go to the cities. They leave their territories and go to the cities to look for new horizons or new jobs. So that's something we've been able to do thanks to the support from these institutions that have helped us, and thanks to the communities. We are willing to make sure that this succeeds every day. We've also been able to make sure that we give education or that we train 27 students. They are technicians in agriculture and another group of 30s in touristic services. And they have their own certificate. They've been certified by the National Learning Service, SENA. What else? Let me see. We've also believe the idea of having this farm is that all these models will be environmentally friendly and that we'll be able to replicate them. starting with the beneficiaries who are part of the association and then spread out throughout the region, because we realize the damage that's been done uh, because of deforestation. So we do not want that to continue to happen. And that's been one of our objectives, that thanks to this, what we've done so far, we have achieved that goal. Also, with our association or cooperation, we have a tourism operator that is uh, this expedition. I didn't send the name. It's a registered name. It has this name, Hidden Paradises. It started in Mesetas with a Weja River, going down the river, and then it goes. She mentioned three rivers, three river names. After the peace accords, we got to know and visit many places that we as farmers did not know of, because before it was a problem to try to visit some other place. So the moment of the agreement came and the peace accords were signed, we were open to tourism, and there are many beautiful places to visit. We can advertise them as hidden paradises, and people can practice extreme sports such as rappel. There is tracking, different things. So thanks to the peace agreement today, we feel that we are vulnerable, though, but we see that the peace accords are not being implemented, and the government, or they're not complying with the agreement. So this, in the last time, the last years, it's been a not it's been an obstacle, because all the work was going hand in hand with point one, that is the land tenure. So it's been complex, and I'm gonna say that we're afraid that we'll not be able to continue with our project, because tourism and nature, it's one of the richnesses we have in our region. I want to continue to protect and preserve this every day, and we want to find a way to, make a living, to develop our economy for indigenous communities, because we've always been forgotten by governments, by the state. It's always been a an impact of the conflict. So we've always been afraid, but the idea is to continue with our project and succeed, get it through. It's been a big achievement, because we've been able to find new leaders, to engage young people, engage women, to show that we peasants have always been united, that we always know that union makes you stronger. And these community projects succeed. And one of the key factors is to work hand in hand with nature, and conservation is one of the big points that we should try to seek and implement in our territories. So this is how I can share with you what we've done thanks to the peace accords. And nowadays, we believe that it's become weak, because there is conflict again. There's conflict over the territories. Of course, the institutions, the issue of institutions, environmental institutions as well. So we as a region have started to find conflict in our region. Thank you, Jennifer. Can you confirm if that's the end of your presentation? I was not sure if you had already finished or wanted to share something else. Your mic is off. Oh, there. Okay. That's it. That's my presentation. That's the end. Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Very interesting. great opportunity for to encourage everyone to go and visit these hidden corners, these hidden paradises. It's amazing that even for those who live there, they were able to discover those points. These are the benefits that sometimes they seem intangible in the peace agreement. You see how some people get benefited, but there might be associated risks if this peace process or this understanding of peace that James and Irene talked about is not the same notion, then the effects it may have on our communities and on the people who live there and those who enjoy this natural capital that Stephen talked about, and where we can see how this financing should precisely benefit people who live in the regions. This is part of the benefits that we get from the peace agreement, but most likely there may be some risks associated to the issue of peace. So we want to, or I want to take advantage of this opportunity to listen to our last panelist and to hear about the relation between deforestation and peace. And based on that, we can open the mic for dialogue and questions amongst everyone. So go ahead. We see your shared screen. If you can check on that, use slideshow, that'd be better. And your mic is off. You need to turn your mic on.
Okay, good afternoon. This is better, I hope. All right. So thank you very much for the first three presenters in this session. It was very interesting, and I will be brief because I don't think listening to the presenters now, but also the ones in the sessions before me, that I have too much new to add to the complexity that the Colombian peace process basically brings for the environment, but also for local communities. So my name is Torsten. I'm from Lund University Center for Sustainability Studies. I've been doing fieldwork and data collection in Colombia for the past 6-7 years. And I'm also part of an interdisciplinary group where we actually look at the social ecological consequences of the peace agreement in Colombia since 2016. What I'm presenting today is based on a paper that was published about a year ago in the Journal of Political Ecology. I'm basically looking at the peace process in Colombia, Red Plus, Visión Amazonía, but also like how it actually links to reducing deforestation, the goal that Colombia has to reducing deforestation, but at the same time pursuing the big and challenging problem that is peace building in Colombia. And I think, I mean, there has been some discussions about what is peace, what is the post-conflict time, how can we define this in Colombia right now? And I think Irene has also mentioned this in the presentation. Colombia is at a crossroad right now. We're basically like slipping back into a different type of conflict, or many different conflicts in the different territories, that is less political, but becomes more about the one big resource and well, natural capital in a way as well that has defined the Colombian conflict for such a long time. And this is basically about land. I think most of you who are here today know that the conflict in Colombia has been characterized by land, by issues about access to and ownership of land, and also by basically like who is able to gain from different activities that one can do on the land, be it the growing of illicit crops for the production of coca, mining, but also like agricultural production. So during the conflict that was luckily finished or partly finished by the peace agreement in 2016, a lot of changes have happened in the Colombian environment. I mean, we saw deforestation related to illegal activities, illicit crops, but also because of the abandonment of agricultural lands by small peasants within taken over by large-scale farmers. But however, this deforestation is nothing, or has been very, very little in comparison to what happened then. So regarding the conflict again, the concentration of land in Colombia has been very unequal, even at the continental comparison Latin America, but it has become even more unequal during the time of the conflict and since the signing of the peace agreement. And we're at the situation right now, this is from a source in 2017, an Oxfam report, where basically 1% of the large farms in Colombia account for 81% of the land ownership. So the concentration of land has always been unequal in Colombia, and it has become even more unequal since the beginning of the armed conflict and since the signing of the peace agreement. And this is a trend that we can see developing or unfolding right in front of our eyes right now as well. Rigo Otero in the morning, he presented numbers on deforestation, and so have some other presenters before me. And one thing is clear, that deforestation in Colombia has really tremendously increased since the signing of the peace agreement in 2016, and particularly in areas where the FARC was present. This type of deforestation has increased more than in areas where the FARC was not present. We can also define these areas as pitted areas, these special municipalities where there is a special focus on peace building. There's different reasons for that. It's because of institutions not being present so much. It's because these areas have typically had very low deforestation before the peace agreement was signed. These are large areas, these are rural areas where we have fairly large amounts of forests. But it's also because of the new constellation of actors that tries to seize the moment, that tries to actually use the opportunities to expand land holdings, and that basically eat into the forest to grab a piece of the cake, which is the land. If you compare deforestation rates in the Amazonian regions with the national deforestation, we can see that basically in 2015, just before the peace agreement was signed, in anticipation of the peace agreement and with the peace agreement being implemented and signed, deforestation rose quite tremendously in these different areas, these different regions, particularly in the Amazon, like Caquetá, Putumayo, Guaviare. There has been a drop in the last 2 years, but I think Sebastian this morning, he also said that in 2020, it looks like the numbers are going up again. That there's still some time before we will see the full numbers, but there's indications that the numbers are rising again instead of falling further. And it's probably got to do with the pandemic as well, and increasingly less oversight by institutions and by the government. At the same time, looking at sources from the Federación de Ganados in Colombia, one can see a tremendous increase of the number of cattle in the country. These are numbers I extracted from the statistics at the Fede Ganado. And particularly when you compare it to the Colombian average, the Amazonian departments, Caquetá, Guaviare, Vichada, Putumayo have seen a really tremendous increase in the number of cattle that is present on the land. I mean, in Guaviare, for example, which is the orange one, the orange line in the top, it has more than doubled since 2016. That's a tremendous increase. And of course, if we know how cattle ranching is done in Guaviare and Putumayo and Caquetá, we know that there's a lot of land that has been converted to cattle ranching. So this is not surprising. It's something people have seen coming, and this is something that is being analyzed constantly. So we know that cattle is one of the main drivers of deforestation. So are roads, increasing road building, legal and illegal roads, coca extension to some extent, but also mining actually. And I think it was quite interesting to listen to Stephen earlier about the international financing that is basically like involved in financing large mines in Colombia, particularly coal mines. And the government is making no deal out of their ambition to actually use mining as a main locomotive for growth. I mean, basically financing part of their economic activities and their peace building by expanding the mining sector, particularly the legal mining sector. So mining is present in a large share of the country. It's gold mining, it's coal mining, and there's some other mineral mining. There's a lot of foreign direct investment going into the expansion of the mining sector. And the goal of the government in the National Development Plan is actually to increase it. It's to double foreign direct investment, but it's also increasing gold production by 43% from what it was before. But we're talking about legal mining here, not illegal mining. And illegal mining is present in an even larger share of the country. Particularly mining for gold is happening. And I do field work in the Amazon in Valpes and in the Amazon in Caquetá. And you can see these little miners in many different regions along the rivers mining for gold. So gold mining is something that is present throughout the country. And it's probably increasing also in regards to COVID, which is one main driver of actually, like, it has driven the gold prices up to a large amount in the beginning. So gold mining is quite destructive, not so much for deforestation, but it actually has or brings about lots of ecological problems regarding pollution of rivers, but also social issues where it is happening. But just to be very brief and short, when it comes to the land issues and the distribution of land in Colombia, this is a very structural reason that has existed for such a long time, that actually to some extent gave rise to the armed conflict in Colombia, and that is still not addressed. I think the presentation we just listened to also basically made that point, that a lot of peasants who are living in these rural areas don't have access to legal titles. The land registry is lacking behind. The first point of the peace agreement is by far not implemented to a large extent. It's still lacking behind as well. And it's something that has to be addressed very quickly. Otherwise, there's lots of actors, powerful actors, who will seize a chance to actually extend the land ownings by grabbing more land from the Amazon and by deforestation increasing in the process. It's interesting that the National Development Plan, and I think in the Colombian government in a way is like doing this like double rhetoric. On one hand, like catering to international donors, like the Norwegian, German, British governments, to actually say that we're going to address deforestation. We have a zero deforestation goal. But on the other hand, actually pushing for quite destructive economic industries into the territory that actually most people who work with this are really much aware of, that this brings about social environmental conflicts, is a driver of deforestation, it's a driver of environmental pollution and change, and it's something that many people actually do not embrace as well. And therefore, it was interesting to listen last year how I don't remember, it was the Supreme Court decided that it's actually not it's unconstitutional to have public votes on mining projects. So taking away the possibility for people to actually vote against mining projects happening in their municipalities. So the government officially frames mining as a cornerstone of the future sustainable development of the country and its territory, which is in a way a Faustian bargain, if you want to, because you cannot, as was said by McNeish in 2017, you cannot extract peace and social justice by actually furthering inequalities and by driving social environmental conflicts. As I mentioned earlier, one thing that has become very clear over the past years, and also listening to the presentations, is that one of the most important cornerstones is a comprehensive rural reform, to allow people to actually own land that they are using legally, to be safeguarded against invasion, to have titles that they can use to defend their right to the territory. This is something that is really lacking behind. It's something that I'm sure we're all aware of, that has to be worked with much more, and it has to be really like a key point in any future discussions regarding the implementation of the peace agreement. And one can also say that despite the rhetoric of the government, particularly the Duque government, the environment and environmental concerns still remain at a very low priority in the transition towards peace. The environment is not really mentioned in the peace agreement. And what we see right now is basically peace at the cost of environmental destruction to some extent, particularly at the cost of the Amazonian forests, but also other forests in the country. So I'm looking forward to any questions or comments from your side. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. Now we're going to have some time for questions. We've received some questions so far from the participants. I just want to highlight from this presentation that we've just heard an element associated to the equality use of land that's known in our country. And this has led to the fact that people who are claiming their rights over some lands tend to be killed. You know that we are in a very complex situation. Precisely some recent time ago, the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia sadly mentioned that, or reported that the Kamsa people, leader and her granddaughter in Putumayo, were assassinated. Precisely, they were guardians of these people, and they also guarded the territory. Cases such as these have sadly taken place more and more in our country. When we talk about the issue of land use, we're talking about in the end about the survival of peoples. We're talking about the national richness of our countries, richness of our country. We could turn into richness of people, for people, and that people initiatives such as Villa Catipsa actually enjoy it or take advantage of it and use it, or it could fall in the hands of a few. In the hands of a few. That's more or less the discussion we have at hand. And I invite now that we go to the QA session. And along the same lines, we can start with some related questions by Sandra and Angela about this financing, geographically explicit financing as deforestation is related to criminal finance and their methods to manage capital. So how do you see that? And I think, Stephen, this is question especially for you. How do you see the role of the special finance in identifying these illegal stakeholders who are promoting deforestation and the loss of these natural ecosystems in the country?
It's a great question. I hope to come back next year with an answer. um, this is the next step in our research project with Gabriel and Liliana. We wanted to see what we would learn by looking at legal activities. And the next step, Liliana has started, mapping out, if you will, the contours of the gold industry sector, both illegal and legal, and see where the points of convergence. It's going to be at the points of convergence, probably somewhere along the supply chain, where we may be able to apply some of these tools. At the same time, Mineros, the large Colombian gold mining firm, I mean, if you look at their investors, it's some of the largest, if not the largest, Colombian pension funds in the company. So it raises a question as to, in terms of governance, the G in ESG, in terms of governance, what is Mineros doing to ensure that they are entirely licit, the gold that they move, the gold that they mine is entirely licit. So I can't give you a good answer right now, but I can stress to you that this is the next step in the research agenda.
Thank you, Stephen. Maybe a couple of comments. Torsten talked about the zero deforestation agreements here in Colombia. We're working on developing that kind of agreements to guarantee that meat, milk, oil, palm oil, cocoa that we use is deforestation free. And when it comes to other countries, as a matter of fact, the buyers will know that they're not promoting that deforestation. Nonetheless, that connects directly to the element of traceability, proper traceability that is actually true. And it's not just a phenomenon of a greenwash phenomena related to having a seal, just to show a seal of zero deforestation. So there are some technical elements that imply a lot more development, but also we have the chance to be connecting, to connect markets and make them aware, both nationally and internationally, aware of the promotion of these activities that will benefit in the end the communities that are there in the field. So I take advantage to connect to another question by Victor. He says that he asks why processes carried out by the peace process is implicit the group of participants in the territory. For example, in Capricho Guaviare, it seems like the population is a foreigner to the process in NTCR Colinas. So I think that in principle, either Irene or James could tell us a little bit because precisely they were touching on these points, how important it is to have this view, to listen to the communities within the view of peace and promoting the territory. Irene or James, your ideas about this question. Thank you. I'd like to say, and then James can follow up on it. take advantage of the opportunity to reflect on two things that are important and derive from this conversation, and they derive from our research too. And it's the discourse of those who are holding the success of the peace accords. We're talking about mainly the government, but also still there are some sectors from the common party that defends that the peace accords still has a chance. There are some social stakeholders of participation who are suitable. We're talking about those who can easily join that discourse, that power discourse, neoliberal discourse, to precisely promote the discourse of development, to cope with it, to adjust to it, some developing models, and to create markets. However, it's not so strategic to talk about or to talk with organizations that continue to claim their right to land over productive projects in some rented lands to produce cocoa or coffee. And I think it's important here to read this critically uh, as to what it means politically. We cannot continue to celebrate a few elements, some experiences, successful isolated experiences that do not show commitment in the implementation of point one, and that allows other stakeholders to continue to promote the idea that this agreement is being deployed, because the thing is it's not being complied, it's not being implemented. The rate of threats, murders of social leaders, forced displacement, massacres, it shows that it's not being complied. And in terms of land use, we're saying that it's four times um, the number of hectares with cocaine. It's three times more in the neighboring municipalities. So this leads to a scenario where we need to take this seriously. What is going on beyond that? There are some isolated successful cases. And that is also a way to say that, of course, we celebrate that there are some initiatives, community associations, and so on, but we also need to see who is being left out. In the case of Cauca and the areas where we work, we have been working throughout these years. What we see there is that those who was remained there was the wives of some of the fighters or combatants. Out of 202 people who left their weapons, surrendered their weapons, now there are only 20 of them. All others are dispersed because they're afraid, lack of opportunity, because nothing happens there, because the project never arrived there. There are no lands. Of course, those 20, they form a cooperation or an association, and it has failed sometimes, and it's not productive or efficient. It's the chili crop, and it hasn't been successful. So I think the perspective from the environmental peace building has to be seen in combination with the ecology, political ecology, and to understand what or who the stakeholders are, the directions, their aims, and where we're going with this transformation of the social relations of the agreement. Thank you. And I'd like to add, maybe James can make comments. We're asked about the case within the green strategy in Cauca. How you see that this refers to the projects that have environmental and conservation aim. Everything is focused on infrastructure, more production. So in that work that you carried out, how's that topic more associated to conservation and environmental governance? What we've analyzed is that the perspective to implement the peace agreement in this region prioritize PNIS over PDET. That happened also in many areas. So in this case, everything about control, eradication of crops, replacement of crops, they took on the agenda of the state agencies and the community organizations as well. And I'm talking about this because PNIS has a strategy to replace, of course, has agricultural projects, and that's a bias. It's an orthodox interpretation of what replacement could mean to displace an illicit economy. I talked to one clerk that came from Bogota to Cauca, and I asked, what happens if there are some more creative entrepreneurial efforts? Couldn't we possibly replace the illegal economy of cocaine with some entrepreneurial effort, some community woman to create resources? And no, they just think about crops, agriculture. And to the extent that there is a focus on productive processes, some agribusinesses, because they are all chains, productive chains to export. I mean, we're talking about coffee, cocoa, and avocado, and that's it. It's just for the export chain. There's nothing that tells us that we're talking about local markets, food security for the local community. So if it's out of that standard with a aim to export, to transform the land use for export purposes, then conservation is not, doesn't have a place there. For example, if we were there participating in PDTs and the first investment trying to promote the idea of conservation projects, that is really important to protect water sources, especially in the central mountain range. And there was a block. That's not a priority, and it's because in this area it wouldn't be conservation for tourism, because there are zones where conservation for tourism is seen as a possibility, but not here, because these zones are still in war. So no one is going to go to Rio because they're shooting one another, just as it was 10 years ago. So conservation for tourism is not a chance there, and conservation by itself, for the sake of conservation, is not profitable. And very briefly, I'd like to make a comment as a follow-up to the answer to these two questions, and it's as follows. Approaching conservation, environmental conservation, and ecological balance in these territories implies articulating the institutions of the state with the governance um, of communities that are present in the territory, knowing that the state is not present there, it's not acting, it's not active, it's not present, it's not performing or carrying out its public administration. It is the communities and the local powerful entities, those that have the capacity to influence the process. But articulation between community governance and the institutions is incompatible in this perspective of peace that is being imposed, or that took control and direction of the implementation of the peace accord. And it's incompatible because the proposals and the projects in the territory are contrary. They are opposing. It's not for the communities. For the communities, peace means we're living well. It implies many things that are not there, are not being prioritized from the institutional dominating viewpoint. Thank you. And about that, I'd like to take advantage to connect to two related questions and ask Jennifer, who's in the region there, to give us that view from the territory. On the one hand, Alejandra asks what dynamics are known about the conservation by the community in relation to land tenure. And also Jennifer, another question from Maria El Pilar. First of all, she congratulates you for the work you've done and how valuable the process is, and they like to know if there is some kind of training project with the SENA, the National Learning Service Center, or you're systematizing those experiences, or where they can find more information about the project. Jennifer, thank you. Yes, hello. Training program with SENA, it's kind of complex. We were able to bring this because we had the program. It was thanks to the Norwegian embassy. We did all the paperwork directly there before Sena, so the instructor would come. But as such, we here in the region, we never had that as a learning program. I mean, out of their own initiative, they wouldn't have come. I mean, they came here because of the program. Thanks to the program, it was an environmental peace building program. And now the land tenure issue, it's been very complex, especially for women, because there's not a way to buy these lands so that these women themselves own the land. And here you can get a piece of land if you can get it. It's just the through the community action board. It's a document saying that they own the land, but there's no titling. There's not a property deed. Nothing legal. Thank you. Where can people learn more about your project and your experience? We have our email of our association, katitsa at gmail.com. And tourism is so katitsa expedition at gmail.com. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to write them here in the chat. Thank you. Yes, so everyone can see it. We need to close now. So we had very interesting views from mesetas in El Meta to a satellite view when we were looking how we can use and look into these applications for geographical or georeferentiation tools. But the bottom line is there are questions where we need to come up with answers as a country. There are some risks, as was explained by Torsten, but also the opportunities are there. And these are opportunities that in the end will benefit our people. And as explained by James and Irene, that'll depend on the view, the notion of peace we have. So we need to have a common understanding on peace. That's a big challenge in our country, but whatever decision we make, there'll be people there who are suffering or being benefited from the decisions. So remember to keep people at heart to be able to do this, as Jennifer did, give create opportunities and create make a better country for everyone.